Max sat at his desk, the low hum of his computer the only sound that filled the small, dimly lit room. The glow of the screen reflected off his glasses as he logged into Vortex Online, a virtual reality game that had become his life. Max was not a gamer, he was a legend that in the virtual world of Vortex. He wasn't just a player. He was the virtual warlord, an unstoppable force. No one had ever defeated him in battle. His avatar, tall, muscular, with armor that shimmered like a starry night sky, was a sight to behold. His skills with a blade were unmatched. His reflexes were near perfect. He was, in every sense, the game's ultimate weapon. Max loved the feeling. The rush of power, the excitement of battle, the thrill of destruction. It was all so exhilarating. In the real world, he was a college dropout with few friends and no prospects, but here, in Vortex, he was a god. The cheers of players echoed in his ears whenever he entered the battlefield. His name was synonymous with victory, his reputation solidified by countless battles. The portal to the arena materialized before him, and Max grinned. He could hear the battle cry of the enemy from the other side. A giant mechanical beast, towering above him, its glowing red eyes locking onto him as it stomped forward. Max's fingers twitched on the keyboard. This would be another victory, another highlight for his growing legend. Without hesitation, he leapt forward, his virtual sword raised high. The battle was over before it even began. With a single strike, the beast collapsed into digital pieces, its massive frame crumbling into a pile of sparks and code. Max stood victorious, breathing heavily, his chest swelling with pride, but as he caught his breath, something felt off. The usual euphoria, the adrenaline of the fight, was missing. It was like a fog had settled over him, clouding his mind. The victory felt hollow. He had won, but there was no joy in it. No sense of accomplishment. Just emptiness. Max shook his head and stood there for a moment, staring at the empty battlefield. He was used to the rush, the thrill of the fight, but now, nothing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe he was just tired. He had been spending hours in Vortex, day after day, without much time for anything else. The sudden appearance of a friend's message startled him from his thoughts. "Max, you okay?" the message read. It was from Jake, one of his closest friends in the game. Of course, Max typed back, though he wasn't entirely sure of his own answer. Just had a long battle. Feeling a little weird. Weird? You never feel weird after a win. You're unstoppable. But you don't sound like yourself. Are you sure you're alright? Jake's message popped up again. Max stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the keys. What was he supposed to say? That everything felt empty? That he was starting to question the very thing he had come to love, but he didn't have an answer. Instead, he typed back, "I'm fine. Just tired, I guess. I'll catch you later." Max logged off, his avatar disappearing into the ether of the game's virtual world. He pulled off his VR headset, blinking as the real world came into focus. The room was silent again, save for the soft hum of his computer. He felt strange. Disconnected, even. He stood up, stretching his stiff limbs. His body ached from the hours of gaming, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was something deeper. Something inside him was changing. Max couldn't pinpoint it, but it was there. A gnawing emptiness that seemed to grow with every victory, every battle. He glanced at his phone, his mind drifting back to his conversation with Jake. He had ignored his friend's concern, brushing it off like it was nothing. But maybe Jake was right. Maybe something was wrong. Max couldn't shake the thought that the game had started to consume him in ways he hadn't fully understood. He had always known that Vortex was addictive. The way it sucked players in, made them lose track of time, made them feel more alive than anything in the real world. But now it was starting to feel different. Max had become so wrapped up in the game that he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt anything real, anything human. The next day, Max logged in again. He had to. There was nothing else for him. His body moved on autopilot, as if driven by some force beyond his control. The screen flickered to life, and the portal to the battlefield opened. Max's fingers gripped the keyboard with renewed intensity. He was ready for battle again, but this time, something was different. As soon as he stepped into the arena, the same feeling from yesterday washed over him. The emptiness. The numbness. He gritted his teeth, shaking it off. Just get through the battle, Max win. Like always, the enemy appeared in front of him. This time, it was a hulking creature, part machine, part organic matter. Its red eyes flickered as it charged toward him. Max's sword was raised, his avatar leaping forward with speed and precision. Another victory. Another fight won, but again, the thrill was absent. He swung his sword and slashed at the beast, but it felt like he was just going through the motions. He defeated it easily, as he had so many before. But inside, there was nothing. No victory dance, no sense of achievement. Only the same cold emptiness that had started to gnaw at him. Max stood there in the digital wasteland, the creature's body dissolving into pixelated fragments. The arena was empty again, save for the echoes of his own footsteps. His heart beat in his chest, but it felt distant, almost disconnected. It was then that the voice of another player echoed through the arena. Max? You okay? Max spun around, his avatar's eyes scanning the darkness of the battlefield. He recognized the voice immediately. It was Seraph, a player he had known for a while. Unlike the others, Seraph wasn't intimidated by Max's reputation. He was smart, observant, and had a way of seeing things that others missed. Yeah, just needed a break. Max's voice cracked slightly as he responded, but Seraph didn't seem to notice. You've been pushing yourself too hard, Seraph said, his voice taking on a tone of concern. You're not the same. I've been watching you. It's like you're fading, Max. Your victories don't seem to matter to you anymore. Max paused. His fingers hovered over the keys. This was the last thing he wanted to hear. The last thing he wanted to admit. But it was the truth. He had been feeling it, too. And yet, he couldn't stop. He didn't know how. It's nothing, Max typed back, his words hurried. I'm just tired. I'll be fine. Don't worry about it. But Seraph's next words were more direct. You're losing yourself, Max. Every time you fight, you lose a piece of you. You're addicted to the power. But the cost is your humanity. Max froze. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He couldn't respond. Couldn't speak. The words were true. He knew they were. But he didn't want to accept it. Didn't want to believe that the thing he had loved for so long had started to hollow him out from the inside. Max logged off once again, pulling the headset from his head. His hands trembled as he placed it on the desk. He had to face the truth. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, but what was the answer? Where could he go from here? The only thing that had ever given him a sense of purpose, a sense of pride, was Vortex. Without it, who was he? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. The digital world called to him. But this time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to answer. Axe stared at the screen, the hum of his computer now a distant murmur as the weight of Seraph's words settled deep into his chest. His hands, once steady and certain as they controlled his avatar's every move, now trembled slightly on the desk. The emptiness he'd felt during his last battle had become undeniable. He could no longer push it away, no longer dismiss it as a temporary glitch. It wasn't a fleeting moment. It was real. Losing a piece of you, Seraph had said. And as much as Max wanted to reject it, part of him couldn't. Every time he logged into Vortex, every time he fought, it was like he was slipping further away from something important. His humanity. Max pushed his chair back, his mind racing. He was no stranger to addiction, not in the conventional sense. He hadn't fallen into a pattern of substance abuse or anything like that. But this vortex, the game, had its own kind of pull. And it was powerful. The victories. The power. The feeling of invincibility. But what was it costing him? The only world that had ever felt real was the one inside the game, but now, it felt like something was missing. As if he were fading, a ghost in a digital landscape. The thought of giving it up, of walking away, seemed impossible. Could he? Could he even remember how to live without the game? He sat in silence, his thoughts swirling like a storm. The light outside his window was fading as the evening turned to night, but Max didn't notice. The room had become a blur, the edges of reality beginning to dissolve into the hum of the virtual world. His mind kept going back to Seraph's warning. Every time you fight, you lose a piece of you. He needed to talk to someone. Someone who might understand. Someone who wasn't just in the game, someone real. But who? Jake? He thought of the last conversation he'd had with his friend, the one he'd brushed off. Jake had been worried. Too worried. But Jake wasn't here right now, and Max wasn't sure how to reach out. He wasn't sure how to put into words what he was feeling. How could he explain something he didn't even fully understand? The pull of vortex tugged at him again. The familiar flicker of the portal. The chance to fight, to win, to prove once again that he was invincible. But deep down, Max knew that this time, the battle would be different. He could feel it. He was tired of running. He put on his VR headset, his mind a whirl of confusion and frustration. As the world around him shifted into the familiar pixelated landscape of vortex, he wasn't sure what he was looking for anymore. Was he here to conquer once again, to drown out the emptiness? Or was he searching for something else, something he couldn't name? Max's avatar appeared on the battlefield. He was ready to face whatever came at him. But as he took in the scene around him, something didn't sit right. The arena was vast, empty. No enemies, no players. Just him, alone in a digital desert. He blinked, confused, and moved forward. The air, if it could be called that, felt cold, disconnected. His footsteps echoed in the silence. A message flashed across his screen. You've come, but you are not yet ready. Max's heart skipped a beat. Who was this? Was it another player? Some new challenge? His avatar paused. He didn't recognize the username. No one had ever addressed him like this before. Who are you? He typed, his fingers hesitant. The message appeared almost immediately. I am Seraph. I've been waiting for you. Max blinked, confusion creeping into his thoughts. Seraph, he typed, his fingers trembling. What's going on? Where are we? This is the place between places. The core of the game, where everything starts and ends. Max frowned. The core? Was Seraph messing with him? Had he stumbled into some glitch? He looked around again, but the silence stretched out, a heavy, oppressive weight. Nothing about this place felt familiar. The textures, the layout, they were all wrong. You're losing yourself, Max, the message continued. But this is your chance to fix it. Max's breath hitched. This wasn't a coincidence. Seraph was telling him something he already knew but had refused to accept. He was the one who had been slipping away. He was the one who had been consumed by the game. Every fight, every victory, had stolen a piece of him. And it was happening again. Right here, right now. How? Max typed, his voice shaking as he spoke the words he never thought he'd say. How do I fix it? You must choose, Seraph replied. You can continue to fight. You can continue to claim victory. But each battle will take more of you. More of your humanity. The price will become too high. Max's breath came in shallow gasps as the weight of Seraph's words sank in. He had already known this, deep down. The fights, the victories, it had all been a distraction. He hadn't realized until now how far gone he truly was. He wasn't just losing emotions. He was losing himself. He wasn't the man who had started playing this game anymore. He was something else. Something hollow, and the other choice, he typed, dreading the answer, walk away, Seraph said. Leave the game. Let go of the power you crave. Live again. Regain what you've lost. Max stood in the virtual landscape, his avatar frozen, staring out at the emptiness before him. The choice was clear. He could stay. He could keep fighting, keep winning. But each victory would cost him more. The power he sought would consume him until there was nothing left. Or he could walk away. Let go of everything that had made him feel alive. But if he did that, who would he be? For the first time in a long while, Max didn't have an answer. The uncertainty, the fear of facing a world without the game, it gnawed at him. But something inside him knew it was the only way. He had to walk away. He had to stop. I choose to leave. The words left his fingers with a sense of finality. There was no turning back now. Max's avatar stood still as the digital landscape began to fade around him, the familiar hum of the game slowly dying away. It was almost as if the game itself was reluctant to let him go, but the decision was made. Max was no longer the virtual warlord. He was just Max. A man who had lost his way and now had to find it again. When the world around him finally went dark, he felt a strange sense of relief. The emptiness he'd been carrying with him, the numbness that had been a constant companion in the last few weeks, seemed to lift. The battle was over. But this was a different kind of victory. He pulled off the VR headset. The room around him was dim, the sounds of the real world slowly creeping back into his consciousness. The weight of the headset in his hands felt strangely foreign, like a burden he'd been carrying for too long. Max sat in silence for a moment, breathing deeply, as though he had emerged from a fog. His phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Jake. Hey, Max. You good? I haven't heard from you in a while. Max stared at the message. For the first time in a long time, he knew exactly what to say. Yeah, I'm good. I think I'm ready to come back. The world outside was waiting, and for the first time in a long time, Max felt like he was ready to live in it. Max sat back in his chair, the weight of the VR headset now an empty reminder of the person he used to be, or rather, the person he had let himself become. His hands were still trembling, but it wasn't from excitement anymore. It was a different kind of tremor now, one born from the fear of change, the fear of facing a world that had slipped through his fingers. It had been so easy to lose himself in Vortex, to slip away into the digital void where nothing was real except for the victories, the power. But now, staring at the screen in his dark room, Max wasn't sure how to even begin living without it. The quiet of the room seemed deafening in comparison to the constant buzz of Vortex, the pulsing energy of the game's world. The cold air of the real world felt foreign against his skin. He took a deep breath, pushing himself up from the chair. His legs felt unsteady, like they hadn't quite gotten used to carrying him through life again, the life he had abandoned for the comfort of his digital alter ego. The door to his small apartment was ajar, the hallway outside silent and empty. It was a stark contrast to the constant buzz of voices, the clang of swords, the roar of enemies defeated. Max glanced back at the computer screen, his fingers itching to log in again. Just for a moment. Just to see it again. The arena. The rush. But then he remembered the void, the numbness that had slowly crept in, and it was enough to keep him from going back. For now that he walked out of the room, into the kitchen. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, and he paused for a moment, staring at the dull reflection of himself in the microwave's glass door. His face looked tired, hollow. His eyes, which had once been bright with the excitement of every new battle, now seemed faded, distant. Max shook his head. What was he doing? How had it come to this? He hadn't even noticed how far he had fallen. The hours had turned into days, the days into weeks, and before he knew it, Vortex had become his whole world. He had ignored everything else, the real world, until there was nothing left but the battles. A sharp ping from his phone snapped him from his thoughts. Jake's name flashed on the screen again. Max hesitated for a moment. Jake had been the one person who had seen through the facade of his invincible avatar. The one person who had tried to reach out when Max was slipping. He had ignored him, pushed him away, not wanting to face the truth. But now, it was like Jake had always known what Max couldn't bring himself to say. Max tapped the message open. "You still there, buddy? Haven't heard from you in a while. Is everything okay?" The question hit him like a wave, and for the first time in ages, Max felt a real pang of guilt. He wasn't sure how to answer. How could he explain what had happened? How could he put into words the fear that had paralyzed him, the disconnection that had begun to suffocate him? How could he tell Jake that everything he had thought was real had been a lie, a shell built from digital fragments? Max stood there for a moment, staring at the message. He took a deep breath and typed back, the words feeling foreign on his fingertips. "I'm sorry, Jake. I've been off. I've been caught up in something. But I think I'm ready to face things now. Can we talk?" It wasn't much. But it was honest. For once, it was real. Jake's reply came almost instantly. "Of course, man. You know I'm here. Let's grab a coffee tomorrow. My treat." Max smiled for the first time in days. It felt strange, like stretching a muscle that hadn't been used in a long time. But it felt good, too. There was a part of him, deep down, that knew this was the right step, the right choice. He was starting to reconnect with something he had almost forgotten, himself. The next day, they met at the same coffee shop they'd frequented back when Max was still in school, back when life felt less complicated. The sound of the door chimed as Max entered, and Jake waved from a corner table, his laptop open in front of him. He stood up when Max walked over, offering a genuine smile. "Good to see you, man," Jake said, pulling out the chair for Max. "It's been a while, huh?" Max sat down slowly, feeling the weight of the words he had been carrying around for weeks. "Yeah, it has. Too long." Jake's eyes didn't leave Max's face. "You okay? Really? I mean, I know you've been deep in Vortex, but you didn't answer any of my messages. I was worried." Max shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It felt like the moment had finally arrived, the moment he had been dreading. He had to say it. He had to admit what was really going on. But the words caught in his throat, and for a second, all he could hear was the buzzing of the coffee shop around them, the clink of cups, the hum of conversations. The noise felt distant, muffled, as if he were hearing it from a different reality altogether. "I don't know how to explain it," Max finally said, his voice quieter than he intended. "I guess I lost myself, Jake. I got lost in the game. In Vortex. It became everything. The victories, the power, the feeling of being untouchable, it all felt so real. But then, one day, it wasn't. And I didn't know how to stop." Jake's expression softened, his brow furrowing slightly. "You mean you were addicted?" Max looked down, his hands clasped tightly together. "Yeah. I think so. But it wasn't just about winning or playing anymore. It was about not feeling anything else. Every fight, every victory, just made me numb. And I couldn't stop. It was like the more I won, the less I cared about anything else." And now, his voice trailed off, and he glanced up at Jake. "Now, I'm just not sure who I am anymore. I don't know how to go back to what I was before." Jake leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Max, you're not alone in this, man. People get lost in things like that, all the time. It doesn't mean you can't find your way out. You've got a lot of people who care about you, and you've got time. You're not defined by a game. You never were. Max felt a tightness in his chest. The relief of hearing someone else say the words he had needed to hear for so long was overwhelming. He had been so scared to confront the truth, so terrified of what he might find, that he had built walls around himself. But now, sitting across from Jake, it felt like a burden was lifting. He wasn't alone, thanks, man, Max said quietly. I don't know where I'd be without you. Jake smiled. Well, you're not alone anymore. So what's next? How do we get you back to living in the real world? Max thought for a moment. The idea of returning to life, of reclaiming everything he had pushed aside, felt daunting. But it also felt right. It was going to take time, he knew that. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He had the tools now, he had the support. And most importantly, he had the will to fight for something that wasn't just a virtual victory. I guess I start by making some changes, Max said, his voice more confident now. I have to learn how to be human again. Jake nodded. That sounds like a good place to start. And for the first time in a long time, Max believed it.